Thank you for being with us this afternoon. Sorry, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Ariel Rhymes. I'm with the Journal, and I'm so delighted to introduce our next two speakers. Starting with Alan Salzberg right here, closest to me on my left. So Alan Salzberg is a senior statistician and principal of Salzberg. His focus is on statistical analysis, sampling, estimation, and modeling. He is especially interested in the detection and measurement of bias. Alan enjoys writing about everyday statistics in his blog called What Are the Chances?, where he often uses and gets miffed about statistics errors in the popular press. Alan holds a PhD in statistics from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. He also received a Bachelor of Science in Economics. And then to my far left, we have Corey West. Corey West is a senior manager at Summit Consulting, a quantitative consulting firm in Washington, D.C. Corey specializes in leading teams performing data analytics projects comprised of data gathering, data management, statistical analysis, and tailored reporting. As a former teacher, Corey understands the importance of distilling complex analytical approaches to technical and non-technical audiences. Corey holds a Bachelor of Science in Economics from Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University with graduate coursework from American University in Symposium. So everyone, welcome Alan and Corey.
So Corey is going to be giving out little Ziploc bags with heads in them. You're not supposed to eat them right now. I guarantee you at the end of the talk, you can eat them or not eat them as you wish. But we're going to use them kind of in the middle in about 5 or 10 minutes. And I'll explain that when we get there. So for now, don't pay attention to the little text. Too late. Exactly. So, all right. So thank you very much for the introduction, and I also want to thank Abby and everyone here at the Kansas School of Law for inviting us and for hosting us, for inviting us, Robert and all the other people who were so nice and also very fun to talk to in the car in the long ride from the airport about what's going on here at Kansas Law. So that's been a great experience, and we appreciate that. So today we have a two-part talk. It revolves around what Corey and I do every day, which is data science and algorithms, and a lot of what we do has to do with litigation, policy, and law. We do a lot of work in government. We do a lot of work in litigation. I've been an expert witness a number of times in statistics regarding work that we've done and that we do. So we've split it, though, into two topics in that area. The first is fingerprints, the second is opioids. So this is a quick agenda, which I'm not going to really go through, but I'm going to talk about a little bit about fingerprint matching and what a match might mean, and policy around that at the end of that piece. And Corey's going to talk a little bit more about part of the data analytics in the opioid epidemic to talk about that. You've already heard a great introduction, so we can go right to the meat of it. And the shocking picture that we're going to stay on for a little while. On March 11th, 2004 was what was the worst terror attack in Spain's history, and what still is, well, fortunately, it still is the worst terror attack in Spain's history. 10 bombs were set off on commuter trains in the morning of March 11th. 193 people were killed, more than 2,000 were injured in those attacks. And given the timing of it, I think, in part, there was, which was 3 years after 9/11, and there is known as the 11th of March, in sort of a similar way as we talk about 9/11. There was a very quick response, not just of course, within Spain and the SMP, the Spanish National Police, but they very quickly communicated to the world policing authorities. And one of the things they did, which is really what the focus of the next 5 or 10 minutes is going to be, is they identified a couple of fingerprints, 3 fingerprints. One of them, which we're going to drive and focus in on, was on a bag of explosives. 3 of the bombs did not explode. One of them was found on a bag of explosives, and they shared that with Interpol, who shared that print with the FBI, and in the hopes of finding a suspect in the early days. So the FBI got that print, I believe they had the print by either March 12th or March 13th. It was a very quick process, a very quick response to this horrible attack. And the FBI received the print, and I'm going to show you now a picture of the print. And this is a blown up picture, but this is a high quality picture. And the reason I'm saying that, it's a very low quality print. I guess it's kind of obvious when a bad guy, in this case it was a guy, does something, they're not very carefully putting the print down. And or like, when you get pulled into the police, they also make sure, even though you don't want to, that they take your print very well. This is what's called a latent print, and this is kind of typical. A little worse than usual. This is kind of typical. It's not very good. It doesn't look like a fingerprint, a picture of a fingerprint, which we're going to see in a slide or two. But what the FBI did, the FBI has a database called IFIS. I'm not sure that's what they call it. I know that they call it IAFIS, so I'm going to call it IFIS because it sounds like a good thing to call it. The Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System. Okay, so we have this database, and it's not fully automated. You have to first identify points on the print that are of interest. So an expert, a fingerprint expert, first identifies that on the print, and these are the 15 points that are identified. And then you feed it into the system. In this case, they fed it in. By the way, IFIS has over 40 million people's prints and hundreds of millions of actual prints. For many of the people, they have multiple prints of different fingers. Okay, it's a huge database. And this was actually back in, I think it's more now, but this was back in 2010. This is 2004, and they also had many more than 2 million prints, but they fed it through, because it's an integrated database. They have multiple databases. They fed it through a criminal database, which had 2 million prints after doing this scoring. And what the database does, and what it did, is it pulls out 20 prints that it says, these are really similar to that print. So out of 2 million, okay, we've run it through, we've done something now that no expert could do. We've gone through in hours or minutes, I think hours at the time, 2 million prints, and we found the 20 best ones. Okay, so you can see that. So what happened? March 16th, only a couple days later, not fast forwarding you that much, they've gone through the 20 million, of 2 million, they found 20, a fingerprint expert at the FBI has gone through all 20 manually and carefully and found a single print on the right that matches that latent print, okay? So effectively now they've culled these 20 million to 20, and those 20 have been culled to a single print, a matching print, okay? And that, by the way, that match was identified, after it was identified, I mean, it was verified by a colleague at the FBI to say, okay, I agree, this is a matching print, okay? So now I'm going to stop for just a second, and because the next 2 slides are statistics, and we always have to pause before we start doing math. So now, well, what does this mean? Like now we have a match. Someone says it's a match anyway. What does it mean? Okay. So that was a long pause. All right. So this is the framework that we think about statistically when we're doing this kind of study. All right. We looked at, let's focus on the 20 prints, okay? The 20 similar prints. Forget about the 2 million for now. there's two possibilities for the one of the 20 that we matched. It could either be a true positive, we really hope it is, all right? A true positive is when our test says it's a match, our expert says it's a match, and in fact, that is the person who touched that bag of explosives, who carried that bag of explosives, okay? A false positive is when our test says it's a match and it looks similar, but it's not the same. It's a different person, okay? And then the other 19, there's two possibilities for the other 19, the ones we didn't identify. It could be a true negative. We hope they're all true negatives. It's not the person who touched that bag, and that's what we said. We said, the expert went through it and said, no, these prints are different. Okay, or it could be false. One of them, not 19 of them, because there's only one person who touched that bag of that print. One of them might be a false negative. Our test says it's not a match, but the test is a match. Okay? So one question that we should be asking now is, okay, now we have this match. We have an expert. How often do these experts make these mistakes? Well, unfortunately, in 2004, this really had never been studied. Now, it has been studied, but very, very little. And I'll tell you the results. But there have been a couple of good studies. Okay? Here's what the good studies tell you. The good studies say that with similar prints, okay, an FBI expert, an expert who knows what they're doing, not me or you, they don't make many mistakes. They make about a 4% error of false positive. If you give them two prints that are different, they're similar, but they're truly different people. One is latent, a not very good one, and one is a very nice one. About 1 in 24 times they make a mistake. Okay? And on the other side of it, if you give them two prints, one of which is correct one, the two prints match, they get it right most of the time. Okay? So the black stars are when they say it's a match, by the way. So there's only one red one in there, they only get it wrong 1 out of 13 times. There's only one black one here, they only get it wrong on the other side 1 out of 24 times. Okay, well, it's time for our experiment. But first I want to introduce it. So let's go back to what could have happened with the 20, all right? Two things could have happened we found the match in 20, we know that, okay? So we narrowed down what could have happened. Two things could have happened, okay? The first thing that could have happened, which is what we hope didn't happen, is that they looked at 20 prints, and one of them was a false positive, and that's the one we think is the match. That's the first. So amongst those 20 prints, it could have been true that there was no true match. The second thing that could have happened, okay, which we're going to explore too, is among those 20 prints, there's one that is the match. All right, and there's, so those are the two possibilities, and then there's, what happened. So I want to. So the first experiment we're going to do is each of you now, hopefully 20 of you, or Corey may have to represent a couple of different print checks. But each of you has a bag, and it has 20. It actually has 24. If I count it wrong, 23. 24 passes in it. One of them is yellow, as you'll notice. Okay. So I want each of you, without looking at which one you're taking, each of you to reach in the bag. So we're going to do an experiment here about false positives. Reach into the bag and pull one out. Okay. And we may do this a couple times, so let's start with this one. Pull one out and look at the color of it. Don't eat it, because we may want to do the experiment. Okay. Corey, I didn't see Corey's pulling out. I don't know what he's doing. Okay. So did anyone pull out a yellow one?
Pull over.
What's that?
They're sealed so well. These are really good guys.
Oh.
Okay. What brand are they? All right, wait. Oh, thanks. We can continue, sorry.
Okay, so no one pulled out the yellow one. But somebody did. Okay, we're going to redo it a few times. I want to wait till we pull out the yellow. It's not going to take long. Okay? Let's do it again. Put it back in. Yeah, you got to put it back in.
Do we win anything if we pull the yellow?
What's that?
Do we win anything? Is there What's the incentive?
Oh, you got it. Okay. Okay, pull it out again. Anyone get a yellow?
There's a yellow.
Oh, what?
Cheater, cheater.
Okay, I could throw this, but you're really far away. Okay. Okay, so we did it twice now. This is actually really good. I think we can stop it. So we did it twice, and we got one yellow. Okay. So in other words, if we had two different experts going through those prints, this is from our very small experiment. If we had two different experts going through those prints, and they were all not matches, we would expect, if they were good experts, not that they were bad experts, if they were good experts, then about once, from our experiment, that maybe one of them would have actually found the match, and the other one would have said, there's no match there. That's pretty scary, right? Half the time, that's what would have happened. So let's do one more experiment before I tell you what the real chances are. Now, I'm going to give you the second possible state of the world. The second state of the world is 19 of you, one of you has to replace your bag. Because now, only 19 of the prints are not matches. One of the prints is the match, but there's still something going on where you could make a mistake. You get a bag with 12 yellow Pezzes and one not yellow one. So you could still not identify. You could have a false negative. You could not identify, but you're probably going to identify. So let's do it. Let's do it again. This is the person who gets the lucky, gets to have the one with the actual print. Okay, so let's do it again. Let's see what happens here. It seals so well. Okay. Oh, okay. There we go. No one got a yellow. Okay, so you got it. Okay, good. I'm really glad this happened. This is very good. You are very good at this game. Okay. So now what we kind of surmised to be about a 50-50 chance. Now it's happened 2 out of 3 times, but not really a lot of. But now, what do we have? We have the real print. The computer did what it's supposed to do. It found 1 out of 20. It found within the 20 it found. It's got the real one. But what happened with the expert? It happened to be the one time out of 13 that the expert didn't realize it. And it was one of those times out of one of the other 19. It was one of those times out of 24 that the expert thought that one was the one that matched. Okay. So we unfortunately. Now, in 2 out of the 3, the 2 states of the world, in 2 out of the 3 cases, we didn't come up with the right person. Okay, so we'll move on. Now you can eat the peasant one. And they do taste it. By the way, I bought a lot of them, and I can tell you from last night eating a lot of them, they do taste different if they're different colors. I didn't know that. I mean, I haven't eaten them since I was a kid. So, okay. So what are the real probabilities? Well, if you happen to be unlucky enough not to have the person whose print is in there, about half the time you're going to find a match anyway. So what we found in those 2 things is about what really happens. For a good expert, about half the time you're going to say, this is the guy, and you're going to be wrong. If all 20 are not matching. If you did find the match in the 20, if the computer did its job, then 87% of the time, you're going to pick a yellow. Usually you're going to pick the yellow. But there's a little bit of a wrinkle to the problem that about half the time, one of the other 19 are going to be yellow, and then you're going to be like, well, which print is it? I don't know, which print is it? And you're going to have like 2 potential suspects, and you obviously know it's not both, and have to make that decision. But at least usually, if the real match is in those 20, you're okay. And then 13% of the time, the true match is not found, which is what we saw here, and then some of that, about half that time, you get the wrong one. Okay, so that's the statistics behind that process that the FBI went through. So now now we're going to go back to Madrid, and I guess I can pull you. Okay, so there's 3 possibilities with Madrid. One is that it's among the 20, and it was that one. Another is that it's not among the 20 at all. And the third is it's among the 20, and it's a different one. So, okay, I'm interested. Does anyone know the answer to this question already? Okay, so you can't raise your hand on any of the things, okay? So, you were Googling. Googling during the thing.
No.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
something that NPR wants to know.
Yeah, okay. So, how many people think that it was among the 20 and it was the one that was identified? I guess I gave you too much away. Okay. So, how many people think that it was among the 20, but it was a different one than the one that was identified? Nobody thinks, does everyone know that? Okay.
What was that?
Okay. And then the third one was not among the 20 at all. It's just like random. Like, so most
No,
people
no,
think that.
the 20 was going to be an option.
All right. So most of you are right. So unfortunately, for the person identified, it was not. It was not that person identified, and it was not among the 20. Had they done this analysis and they played with the PEZs to make light of something that's super serious, they should have known that this was a pretty likely outcome. Okay. And in fact, if you're only going through 2 million prints and it's a crime, I didn't give you all the context because I wanted to fool you, but I still didn't fool you very well. It's a crime that happened in Spain, I did just say that. It's a crime in which, from the beginning, the S&P suspected it was Nigerian bombers. And by the way, not mass separatist, and it wasn't mass separatist, although it was very early believed by a lot of people to believe that. And, this is the kicker in my opinion, the S&P, when they found out about the match, and when they saw the match, they said, we don't think this is the match. The S&P equivalent, the FBI, looked at the print and said, I think you're wrong. And the FBI wasn't doing, I don't think the FBI was doing anything like, they were trying their best to help. There was no nefarious things going on here. The FBI really thought it was a match. They convinced themselves it was. It is really similar. Look, when you go through 2 million and you get the top 20 and then get the best of that, it's really similar. They truly believed it. There was a lot of evidence the other way, and I feel like they had statistical context. They might have done better, but so the guy who it happened to, you can Google this case and find out a lot more about it.
Alan, you might have a question now, or do you want to say?
Yeah, you can give a question now.
I don't remember this part of the story. Why did the S&P doubt the FBI recommendation?
So, well, the S&P did not think, the S&P was pretty strong in their belief. The first thing is the S&P was strong in their belief that it was not anyone from the United States.
Okay.
They had suspects, not particular suspects, but groups in mind. It had nothing to do with the U.S. They did not think it was a perpetrator in the U.S.
Just based on other
things. But the other thing that I find almost equally interesting is there was so much bias in the verification process that because the FBI, imagine you and I are in college, or Corey and I, I'm going through some data analysis and I find something that I think is interesting and I sit there the rest of the day convincing Corey. By the end of the day, Corey's very convinced. That's what happened at the FBI.
groupthing.
The guy who found it was very convinced, and he convinced his colleagues. His colleagues knew he was competent and smart and all that, and he did convince them. It was confirmed. But when the S&P saw it, and doesn't know these experts, they're like, no. There's other problems with this print. And they pointed them out. And these are things that the FBI knew about. They're like, oh, no, that he attributed that to this. Like they thought it was 2 different prints and all this kind of thing. So part of it was the bias of being part of the same organization, which the FBI tries to deal with now. And part of it was just there's 7 billion people on Earth. Why would it be these 2 million people? And wait, where's our keynote speaker? Might be interested in. What I was going to say is there's another issue, which is that who did they look at? They looked at a database of 2 million people. It was a database of 2 million criminal database of 2 million people, which has its inherent biases, racial and other biases in it. In fact, the guy, his name is Brandon Mayfield, the guy they identified, he was never convicted of a crime. He was charged with a crime when he was a teenager, and the charges were dropped. So this is a criminal database, which has a lot of bias in it, and because it's not all criminals, or even people who even had, anything. It's just people who were fingerprinted because they were arrested. All right? And it's good that they have this database on the one hand. On the other hand, if this is what you look at, it reminds me of The Usual Suspects, although I didn't see the movie. It's just like, okay, let's look at the usual suspects, right? And, well, if you do that, you're going to continue whatever biases you have in the past. All right, so that was like an article about they got the wrong guy. So how are we doing, Caleb?
22.
We're already at 22?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just going to talk for like 1 or 2 more minutes. I'm going to skip a little so that Corey can say a little bit. But I do want to round this out by saying I drove into this fingerprint example. This issue with all identification evidence, you have this issue. Not just fingerprinted DNA, handwriting, obviously, DNA. There's always false positives. That article, which I'm not going to talk about, it's about a situation with DNA. And so you have data science, which it means better analytics. It means lower overall error rates in solving crimes on the one hand. Okay, we've solved cold cases with it, and the Innocence Project, we've exonerated people who've long been in jail. We do it prospectively. We do it right now, but we've also used data science to go back in the past. But when you start looking at more data, whether it's for a current case or for past case, you look at a million. If you look at a million, you can now look at a million things where you can only look at 10 for 4, and your error rate's 1 in 1,000. You look at a million things, you can make 1,000 errors. So the error rates start to go up, and you have to take that into account, or else you're gonna start making a lot of mistakes and convicting the wrong people and that kind of thing. Especially if we trust our algorithms too much, as we talked about. Okay, so I'm going to talk about very quickly this last slide, and we have our slides and all the references that we can email you or get out to you after today if you want. But I want to point out, I started thinking about this because of an article that was written 50 years ago. I wasn't very old 50 years ago, that was 2 years old, most of you were not alive. But a guy I used to work with, Will Fairley, and another guy, Michael Finkelstein, who's still very active and wrote an article in this month's in Statistics Journal this month. He's a lawyer, Will's a statistician. He wrote an article saying we should pull this data together and we should tell people, we should tell juries the chances of these things because there's all these imperfections and otherwise they get the wrong story. Well, so in other words, this isn't a new problem with data science. Lawrence Strider at the time said, don't do that. Don't tell them anything. Okay? I thought his article was really arrogant. I mean, probably a pretty arrogant guy, like people know him. And it was basically, don't tell them anything because they can't understand it. So, unless it's 100%. And the reason I said that, and it is part of his article, the FBI, look at the last slide down there, the FBI's rule at the time, you can't say it's an identification unless it's 100% match, whatever that means. Remember, they've never tested the experts to know how often they make mistakes. All the FBI experts said, when you ask them all of them, but they generally said when you ask them, they don't know of any mistakes they've ever made when they said the fingerprint match. How would they know though? How would they know? Only if the person that was later exonerated. So common law doesn't help that much. Fingerprints have been accepted 100 years, for 100 years in court. They're still accepted today. There's been recent articles about that. The Albert rule, which is more recent, and it doesn't really help. It's a pretty scientifically valid process for fingerprinting. I mean, handwriting maybe not, lie detector maybe not. Fingerprinting, 4% error rate. That's pretty good. You don't get much better than that. So it's not that it's invalid scientifically. It's just that anything's going to happen. Okay, so. A lot more references, which I'm not going to talk about, because I'm going to turn it over to Corey to continue on. So you can skip over the next set of references.
Thank you, Alan. So, switching gears a little bit, still talking about data, talk about opioids. And one thing about it is, we've been talking about AI and the trust in the knowledge, trust in the data, but one thing we always talk about at work is a level of skepticism. I have a number, but I really trust this stuff. Although this tool I've built, I'm really smart about this cool tool, it tells me this, but how can I trust it, right? And the results we have today are forcing us to was question the data, question what's going on in the data. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure when we actually, produce anything, understand what's going on. So I'm going to step through 3 items today. Define the research question, talk about the data that we're going to use, and then talk about the current analytics. I use the word current because we started researching opioids in 2017 or so, because as litigation consultants, you want to make sure you're prepared for the next big case. And I think that for the past 3 or 4 years, it's been opioids. At the state level, the county level, and as data junkies, we want to be prepared for it. Started collecting the data, and it turned into something we started doing almost like a side job. So when we were invited to come here, I was like, Alan, how can we freshen this up a little bit? And NPR had a story about triplicate states. Does anybody know what a triplicate state is? It's hard word to say. Triplicate state. You probably know, you probably heard it on NPR, yeah, but
Related quantum.
yes, but Alan this morning, he mentioned carbon copy. Whereas when you were prescribed an opioid, you had the doctor would keep 1 copy. You go to the CVS, you give them a copy, and they had to send that 3rd copy off to the state. So therefore, they could have a record of what's going on. There was a study done late last year, and they mentioned this item, and we were like, well, where else can we find these states? Because for us, we want to understand, do these states perform differently? Do they have a different outcome? Do the research, we found this item called a PDMP. Is anybody familiar with a PDMP? So you can imagine it's a policy run by the states, and we started asking ourselves the question, how is it correlated with 3 things? Deaths, of course, that's the thing we always hear about. Supplies of opioids. Then lastly, what's the cost of these programs? Because we all want to solve problems, but there also comes there's a cost to these things. And trying to get understanding, are these things correlated? Use the word correlation there, not to say impacted or driven by, because proving causality is not the easiest thing in the world to do. And we work hard to avoid trying to prove causality. But correlation is something fun and also you can do a little deeper. So opioid deaths, reported substances, and then the third are annual employment averages. And we chose these 3 groups because if you think about a social problem, you have 3 legs to it. You have the social workers, which my wife is one of. You have medical professionals, which of course somebody running a mental rehab facility. And lastly, you have the law enforcement. And these are all state employees. So you start to think about, okay, as I'm a state, I have to actually employ people to help me solve this problem. Can anybody name the state that did not have a PDMP as of May 2019? Well, I know you know, of course, Brian, because you have this research. But you can tell the answer, they'll tell us.
Missouri.
It's Missouri. Now, of course, it's nearby state. And the thing about it is, but 72 counties took it upon themselves to actually have their own program. So, a PDMP is a statewide electronic database. These last 2 bullets are very interesting because it gives you an understanding there's no real mandate. So it's one of those check the box. As a sports fan, the National Football League years ago instituted this thing called the Rooney Rule. So whenever an NFL coaching vacancy or an executive vacancy was available, he had to interview a minority candidate. I can invite somebody to come talk to me about the job, but there's really a mandate to actually follow through. And we want to start understanding how well these states have been implementing this program. But there's no standardization of actually who manages this actual database. And then lastly, they also determine the access and purpose of using the data. So, you're trying to solve a problem with a policy and procedure, but the question is, how stringent? Does this thing really have teeth? What we'll call it as a gauge. So where do we get our data? Opioid deaths from the CDC, which of course, they've been very busy as of late as well. ARCOS report number 2, that kind of gives you a wider range via the DEA. Population stats from the census, because our goal is to understand how big are these populations, how big are the communities being affected by this. Third is employment data, because again, we want to talk about how much of this is hitting the state budget. How much are they able to pay for these items? And then lastly, we found this cool training from the Hello School at Brandeis University, and they actually listed all of the states that have a PDMP and when they actually institute it. So like, oh, this is a gold mine, because now we can actually start to do some tests within what do these states look like. So we have 2 groupings. We call them the established states and the non-established states. And you'll understand why we cut the data. So any state that had a PDMP prior to 2006, you are what we call established. Because you're veterans, you're established. And of course, those of you who are from states that instituted them after 2006 or 2005, you're not established. I think personally, this is, that's already used in here. The other cool group of these guys, the transition states, the ones that actually say, you know what, hey, let's have us a program. And they did this after 2006. The reason why I'm choosing this as the threshold is 2005, excuse me, is because that's when our data starts. We want to get a sense of how can we break the work into 2 parts, and then we found this cool little timepiece to break it into 3 parts. Here are your states, and every state that's not listed, besides, of course, Missouri, has a PDMP. The first state to have one was California, I believe it was 1939, and then followed closely by Hawaii. So apparently they knew what was going on. It was one of those things that they started to realize early on that we need to have something in place to see how we can manage this problem. Again, level of skepticism. So when looking at this, we have a non-established and established programs. I'm looking at opioid deaths per 100,000 people. The states with the programs have the higher number. Now the question is this the reason why they have it? We don't know. We were not in the rooms when they decided to have this program. Is it because they were having issues? You start to ask yourself the question, okay, well, and this is significant at the 5% level. That's always fun to put that in there. So you have us start to understand states that were established have this high rate of opioid deaths. Again, is that why they have the programs? We don't know. But then you, to the flip side, you say, okay, because you would imagine that they would also have a high degree of supplies. It just, I mean, because a rational human being would say, you have more supplies, you have more deaths, done deal, let's go home and call it, you know, let's have dinner. But that's not the case. They have fewer supplies. Now, again, you have to ask yourself the question, is it because folks aren't reporting it? Is it because the states aren't enforcing it? So again, you know, as somebody that loves data, these are the things that are fun. Because it's not an easy solution, not an easy thing to say, oh, I exactly see what the problem is. So again, it makes you want to dig a little deeper, not just rely on the data. And you'll see kind of next steps how we're thinking about this. But just these 2 slides alone, I was like, oh, there it is. So let's talk about the cost of these things. So we ran a simple regression, and we wanted to look at really 2 things. One is we want to make sure that the results are not driven by population growth. We don't want to just say, oh, since your population grew over time, but of course you have to pay higher state employee wages. No, that's not the case. So yeah, there is a significance in terms of the employment growth. Look at that middle row. States with an established level of PDMP, 16% more in medical costs, medical labor. Again, that doesn't make sense. I have to have a place to take care of my residents that have this problem. But of course, it's not cheap. And these are state budgets. And then 3% for the law. And you know, again, since I have social worker in my house, I'm not surprised by that number, with the 2%. And it's insignificant. But again, you're starting to see how to take care of this problem. It's not a free assignment. And this again, we're looking at just established versus non-established states. And we use the annual averages. Again, not total. You want to say, what am I paying? Well, I was paying you $4 an hour last year. I'm paying you $8 an hour this year. And it's not because of population growth. It's because why? I'm probably asking you to do more. I'm asking you to do more work. Now, the transition states are interesting. Again, level of skepticism. So we discussed the states that fall into one of 2 camps. Program prior to 2005, 2006, or those that had after. Now look at the states that changed over time. Let's take Maryland. And the vertical line shows you when Maryland said, hey guys, let's get on board with the program. We need to have a program in our state to combat this thing called opioids. So on the left side, you see how reported supplies makes its way up until 2011. Then that number just interestingly goes down. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Now, so you've decided to implement a program after you've seen an increase in supplies per person. You implement the program and the number goes down. So of course, we're all, you know, they're in the room, so yeah, we did a great job. Supplies have gone down in our state. We have saved our state of Maryland. As Lee Corso would say, pause. Look at the death. So you find a state that has basically a flat level of deaths between 2007 and 2011 and an increase post. If the goal of this program is to save my state, and again, I'm not trying to indict Maryland, they're my neighbor, I live in Virginia, so I want to make sure I behave myself. I'm going to get back home today. But still, it's supposed to be asked the question, what is happening? How do we implement this program? And then we have this uptick in deaths. Next example is Wisconsin. Wisconsin, again, similar trend. I see where there's an uptick, and then what's interesting here, there's still a lag. And what we're starting to think about is that is there a 1 year or 2 year lag? Because I can say, okay, instead of Wisconsin, you must start reporting your opioid supplies. You must start doing that. But we all know how rules take place. They don't actually start, folks don't start adhering to them until you get a knock on the door or emails. Hey, by the way, I need you to actually follow through. An example of that is that, so at work, so I do litigation work, we have to put comments in our timesheets. And, 4 years ago, it was like a soft rule. If you feel like it, put the comments in, it's all good. We'll work it out in the back end. They were realizing, you know what, let's make it enforceable. Let's make sure when anybody works on a litigation project, press submit on their timesheet, you will yell and say, you cannot submit this because you don't have a comment. It's enforceable. They know exactly what's going on. So there's always that time of lag. But then Wisconsin has the same issue as Maryland. If we are putting together this program to save the state, we find ourselves losing the state, there's an issue. The last piece is this, and this is the one that, as we want to champion improvement, we want to champion states that are going to take care of their citizens, this is the hurdle that states will have to encounter, or overcome, is how do I pay for it? How do I actually put seats in the chairs to educate my staff to take care of the opioid issue? When I see that the increase in population doesn't really do it, what do I see? I see across the board, as states implement this program within 2006 and 2017, within that state, look at the increase in salaries. 36%, 32%, 28%. We hear reports about states losing federal funding. We hear about states having to shrink their budgets because they don't have larger tax revenue. How are they going to pay for this? How are states already going to be smart to make sure they can solve this problem? Again, these are very early questions. But these are things we're starting to think about, like how are we going to do this? Because the one thing that's about is kind of a sad statement, but it's true. It's cheaper for that person to die than it is for them to remain living. I have to pay for it. And if we are living in a society in which we know we have not only the individuals who are on these issues, also their children in their communities, how do we pay for them? When we know it's an increase in cost. And again, same way, annual salaries. Not total wages, but actually, what am I paying you per hour relative to what I paid you last year? Next steps for Tommy. Further investigate PDMP deployment. Because we want to better understand why are some states succeeding, why are some states failing. Incorporate more data, medical claims. Also state funding for abatement programs. And then lastly, these are hitting counties. The last thing I'll say is that living in Virginia, we hear all the time about how our neighboring state, West Virginia, is basically dying from within. And it's not the state level, it's those pockets, those counties, where we're losing generations of individuals. Why? Because of this ravaged disease. And the question is, how do they pay for it? How do they want to combat it?
All right.
Oh, yes.
Does anybody have questions?
Yeah, sorry, I know we're at the time. For the number of deaths from opioids, did that include just prescription opioids or other?
So we're thinking of some illicit drug use there, of course. But the question is, it's hard to say that it explains the entire increase. So we want to figure out exactly how to identify, how to bifurcate that, how to say, okay, 48% is the total. What percentage of this is actually because of opioid use that's been prescribed, or I have a source outside of my doctor's office?
So you were able to figure
No, we're not.
that out?
That's what we would like to be able to do.
Oh,
We're getting that data as because they lump it together as one death and not.
So it could be that the reason the deaths are going up is because as you put these limitations on the prescription drugs, then maybe it's
I find other
from
sources.
So my question is for both, because one of the things that came out early, besides this experiment that I loved, was, we as data folks and as statisticians, we do not want to talk about causation, we want to talk about correlation. But in, the space that we're in right now, causation is, but for motivating 10%, like causation is the currency. And so what I would like you, maybe your reflections on is, right, this reflects a real disconnect between the practice of law and what we can actually do with experts. And so how do we, what is a better space?
I'll answer it on two cases we work on. So one case we've spent the past 2 years working on are the big short, is all the toxic loans. We work on the plaintiff side. And our job is to show correlation. Show that this practice and this outcome are correlated. That's one space. The other thing we do as a firm, we do fair lending, predatory lending cases. And that's what we're trying to show cause. I'm trying to prove, say, look, this bank, this servicer, given their archaic underwriting procedures, either A, decline loans by minorities at a higher rate that look like they're majority borrowers, or if they approve a loan, they charge them higher interest rates. So we can actually see that cause there. But in terms of other matters, not just the correlation space. So a lot is, and we are also led by the guys of the attorneys of the strategy. And but showing causality has not been what we've had to do with other great deals. Does that answer your question in terms of?
Well, because I'm thinking on the policy making side, right? Like, so litigation back, we wind up actually figuring out and understanding how can we pull your expertise and make an argument. But if we're on the policy making side, is there an approach that you would like to see law take so that we can actually properly account for, well, it's not really, like, we're going to have a 4% error rate, and that's great in science, but what should the policy be around that when the ultimate result is maybe someone goes to jail? Or we're going to have this really interesting, hard to unpack, and statistically difficult to identify uptick in opioid deaths.
That is the first piece. So digging in to groupings of those states. Because there are states that are transitioned just like Maryland who don't have this problem. What have they instituted actually at the state level to actually say we are going to solve this problem? Not hand wave our hands and we have a policy. But what policies are they putting in place to make sure we're all at the table and say, we have an issue here in this state, we put these things in place, and if you don't follow them, you have to suffer consequences. That's kind of the causality. Go ahead.
So I can answer the causality statement from another perspective. First thing is that, and I don't understand, I'm not going to claim I understand fully discrimination law, but the idea of if you can show that there can be a burden shift is very helpful to statisticians. In other words, if the impact is more than X, then you know what? You have to prove that it's necessary for the work and not the other way around. Like the burden shifting actually really good for statisticians because the statisticians usually can just show, hey, we just see there's a difference and we can't say that much about it. So I think that's one thing. I'm very much in favor, in terms of the false positives piece, I'm very much in favor of a lot of information being available. I really don't like Tribe's argument at all. And I really think it leads directly to a policy like the FBI had. Has to be 100% match, which is just like saying it has to be 0%. It really is. It just says no accountability. In my mind, it's like Bill de Blasio's has a zero pedestrian death thing. It's like saying, however many pedestrian deaths you want, because it's never going to be zero, so we always fail, so who cares? And that's not totally been true of his policy. I mean, he has done things. I'm not saying he hasn't, but it makes it be no measure. So I think when you have this issue with false positives, which you always do, it can also be there can also be a burden shifting there too. But the courts there would have to be a policy about that. In other words, there would have to be additional evidence. I'm not even sure you should be able to do the search that they did. Because when there's 7 billion people in the world and you can choose 2 million to search and you know you have an error rate of 5%, it sounds small. you pretty much know you're gonna find the guy in there, okay? And going back to the title of the keynote speaker's talk, the Central Park 5, you can find the guys. You can find the guys who are in Central Park. And hey, they've done bad things. Everything lines up, they're the guys. That had nothing to do with data science, but it's the same idea. If we're going to go to the criminal database, and it's a tiny subset of the possible people, and we have no information to think it's anybody in there, and we have information to the contrary, we're going to fail every time. So there has to be a recognition of that, and I think that there needs to be some walls of when we can even use, or when we use it, we have to say it's pretty likely an error, and wouldn't be able to convict us on that. But I don't think it's easy.
But that it worked.
With that, I want to thank both Corey West and Alan Salzberg for their presentation. Really